Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of Uncanny Treks as we drudge through 1966 to 1968 of X-Men comics. We are covering X-Men Epic 2, Lonely Are the Hunted, that runs from issues 24 to issue 45. I am Bob in Cascadia. That is Matt in the Southland. Matt, how are you after this trauma that I've inflicted on you?
Bob, I'm okay, but man, there's some rough comics in this section, and I don't feel this epic contributes as much to the X-Men mythos as the previous epic.
Matt, that's absurd. Issue 24 starts by introducing your favorite X-Men villain, the Locust. It's Plague of the Locust. How can you say this hasn't had an effect on the X-Men mythos?
Everyone remembers the Locust, Bob. Didn't you have an action figure of the Locust when you were growing up?
I did, Matt. I did. I loved the Locust. He was my favorite. So even though the Locust sucks, Matt, I did enjoy there's a scene in the first issue where Xavier has a giant locust, not the locust himself, but one of the locusts, giant locusts, splayed out on an examination table. Presumably Professor X is going to autopsy this thing. That was cool.
He almost has his hand over its head like he's petting it.
It's a good locust. It's more than dog size. It's maybe 2 dog size.
Yeah. The interesting thing about this issue, Bob, is we move into this idea that it's not just that humans can be mutants, also that maybe animals or insects can be mutants as well.
That's something that the mythos could have taken up as an inspiration, but I feel for the most part they did not.
Yeah, it died right here.
I don't know. Does it come back? Maybe. I don't know. But I take your point. Although this issue does helpfully clarify something for us. So the X-Men graduated back in issue number 7, and either the issue wasn't clear or we weren't paying close attention because we weren't sure what they were graduating from. But this issue clarifies that in issue number 7, they graduated from high school. And so now Jean Grey is going off to college like she's Peter Parker, who's going to college at about the same time, his Silver Age comics.
Along with Johnny Storm.
And we see Johnny Storm and Wyatt Wingfoot, Matt.
The comic points out that it's not actually them, but haha. They must have had a really good time in the bullpen back then, Bob.
They did. Smilin' Stan was always a jokester. He was always a jokester. And I just thought Matt might be triggered by seeing Wyatt Wingfoot, who's not his favorite extra member of the Fantastic Four.
I want to make sure everyone understands, too, that it's not a disrespect to Native Americans. It's just Wyatt Wingfoot as a character.
Arguably, Wyatt Wingfoot is still operating under some pretty rough stereotypes that are put on Native American characters. So, in a sense, it's because he's Native American, but it's not because Matt is prejudiced. It's because the comic is prejudiced.
I'm against the stereotype, folks.
Indeed. From that topic, we can move on to issue 25 and 26, Matt. This is the Power and the Pendant in 25 and Holocaust in 26. We have a villain here, Matt, but then he turns into the Mayan god. I think he's supposed to be Mayan, the Mayan god Kukulkan. It's a two-parter. There's not that much to say. I mostly just wanted to point out that on the splash page that opens the first issue here, 25, Iceman has an ice staff. Do you think that's cool? Stan Lee seems perplexed and annoyed by it. Stan, to stress to people, is not the writer of these comics. He's the editor. But he's still a very felt presence. In some ways, you maybe feel Stan's presence more than when he was the writer of the comic.
I dig the ice staff, honestly, and I was trying to remember, after I finished up with reading the entire epic, I could not remember specifically which issue that it first appeared in. If it's here in issue 25, I wish he kept it more often. It reminds me of something that like Tim Drake would carry.
It very much does remind one of Tim Drake's bow staff or Donatello's bow staff.
Since we've got teenagers here, it fits in with that motif.
We also see him use a fork in this one. Like later in issue 26, he keeps a jaguar at bay with an ice fork until Angel can fling the jaguar off into the river, I believe, by its tail. It's a strange scene. Maybe this is the first appearance of the ice staff. It stood out to me because editor Stan took the time to comment on it. Roy Thomas is the actual writer here, and he's the plotter, as I understand. He's doing a lot more plotting than Stan ever did when he was the writer of X-Men. But are you enjoying editor Stan's intrusions on Roy Thomas's writing, or is it one more thing about these comics to not enjoy?
Here's just one more piece of text to add to an already text-heavy set of issues. When we shifted to Roy Thomas writing these, it's a lot more wordy, a lot more going on, and a lot more shifts between settings.
You're right about the setting shifts. I didn't think about that, but you're totally right.
It throws me off a little bit as I'm reading, because I found myself having to go back and to try to keep up with okay, where are we now? Oh, okay, here. And
Look,
maybe that is
I'm
maybe
gonna be
that's a
honest.
sign of a learning disability.
I'm gonna be honest with the listeners, Matt. Saying that I'm reading these comics would be an exaggeration. I am studying the art intensely. Then I am sometimes looking at the captions.
Oh my goodness. See,
That's how old Bob is reading.
old Matt here is helping the listener out because I'm reading them word for word because that's how I roll. So it's a struggle.
Matt's acting like he's some paragon of virtue when I've repeatedly told him in text messages, you don't need to read these things.
I struggle though, Bob. I struggle. I have to know what the story, what's going on. I can't just look at the pictures. It's hard. I've always been that way.
Roy Thomas's writing, I've enjoyed his writing on Thor and Doctor Strange. And he's writing Thor and Doctor Strange in the early 90s. And even then, he's writing a lot of dialogue balloons. He's writing a lot of caption boxes. I'm not sure if he's writing this much, but definitely when I'm reading like an 80s or an early 90s Roy Thomas comic, I'm a bit telling myself, okay, he's a 60s guy. You can't judge him by modern standards. Then it is fascinating to read Stan on X-Men and then read Roy on X-Men and realize that even by famously wordy Stan Lee standards, Roy Thomas writes so much text for these comics.
You'll notice the shift if you're reading these with us. You'll be, oh, okay, new writer totally writes in a different way that even some of the dialogue, you could tell it's a different writer.
It's interesting because in a lot of ways, Roy is trying to do a Stan Lee impersonation, but Matt's absolutely right that it doesn't always come off.
Especially with Beast.
For issue 27, our favorite character returns. It's the Mimic.
Oh, the Mimic. Man, I almost felt like they were trying to push the Mimic as the main character to see if that would work for a little while.
They definitely were. They were like, what if we didn't need 5 characters? What if we just had one character do it all?
And you get that with these Mimic issues where he becomes like the main focus of everything. He has this attitude, okay, maybe he's the cooler guy. He's the anti-hero type dude, maybe, or he's not quite the other X-Men. He's a Raphael of the group, going back to our Ninja Turtles.
I was a little wrong because I warned you that we were in for a lot of Mimic in the second volume, and that isn't really true.
It just feels like a lot.
A little goes a long way, Andrew. I don't have much to say about the Mimic other than he's not great. We talked about him a fair amount in the first volume, but in this issue, 2 interesting things is that we see Xavier telepathically drunk dial Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Then Xavier apologizes and he promises to never call them again because they're hanging out with the Avengers now. But that was somewhat amusing. This is also our first of 2 Spider-Man appearances in these issues. In Spidey's little appearance, he compares the Avengers and the X-Men to fraternities. He talks about them having a rush week. I thought that was funny.
That was interesting. Almost like an early crossover, an early, you know, we've got these heroes that aren't on teams. We got to get them on something. They should do that in Marvel now. Like they should.
That's funny. Yeah. Would you say that there are more or fewer guest appearances and cameos in these issues than in the first X-Men issues we looked at?
Fewer, I would think. I get it confused with Fantastic Four and who's shown up where and in whose book. So it gets combobulated a bit.
These are basically the first real appearance. I think we saw Spider-Man a little bit in the first X-Men volume, but these are the first like full-on Spider-Man appearances in X-Men. And then we definitely saw the X-Men fight the Avengers already in the first volume. Then we've seen the X-Men fight the Fantastic Four, but that was in the Fantastic Four comic, not in the X-Men comic. We saw Human Torch help out in fighting the Juggernaut last time. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is a ton of crossovers. But at this point, though, they were trying to sell other books. It is a marketing ploy.
The next issue is number 28, Wail of the Banshee. That's the thing that actually introduces something that sticks to the mythos, which is the new character of Banshee. Any thoughts on the Banshee issue?
He's so scary in these books, the way he's drawn, man. I'm glad they went with a lighter take with Giant Size X-Men when he does become a member of the team.
They lighten it up even after this issue. But yeah, he's supposed to be a villain at first, and they draw him in a more villainous way. They also draw him in a more aggressively, it's not full on, it has an Irish folklore feel.
Yeah, he's an angry leprechaun looking dude.
Indeed. And speaking of stereotypes, right, we already talked about Wyatt Wingfoot. Banshee, right, his 2 big capers are he's stealing a landscape painting of Ireland, and he's stealing pipe tobacco.
real bad guy here.
Were you surprised? Did you remember? Because I think we had a reprint of this when we were kids. Did you remember that Banshee was a villain? He has this face turned abruptly on the last page.
I did. It's actually the X-Men CD-ROM of Giant Size X-Men that allowed us to remember
It was
this.
on there, but I think one of us also had a paper reprint.
I do remember him being on that because I was, what? Banshee's a bad guy? What? No, but then he turns it. Okay, the little thing he wears on his head. I thought that was just for this issue, but then he wears it later on. So it's not just
But isn't
controlling his mind.
it is revealed to be controlling his mind, but he keeps it on
He,
as a fashion
he just
accessory.
liked it so much. He looks like William H. Macy.
He does look a lot like William H. Macy. He looks like he's going to sell you a car with True Coat on it in a Minnesota parking lot, even though you explicitly told him that you don't want the True Coat.
His powers weren't quite what they are now. I'm glad that they streamlined his powers. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah,
Later on down
yeah.
the road.
I would say this comic treats Banshee's sonic scream the way that a lot of these earlier comics treat Magneto's magnetism, which is to say it's quite flexible in
Yeah,
terms of what it can accomplish.
it's whatever the artist wants to depict it as.
Or whatever the writer decides to describe the artist's depiction as, even. So great to see Banshee. In some ways, this maybe should be my favorite issue of the run, at least of this localized run. It's the only one I have any nostalgia for, but great to see Banshee. The next one is number 29, When Titans Clash. This brings in the Super Adaptoid, who's a Marvel villain I've heard of before, but honestly, I'd heard of him, but I didn't know what his deal was, and I don't think I knew what he looked like. So it was interesting to see him here. I guess this is his first appearance after being in 3 straight Captain America comics. And he's the mimic to the Avengers, which is, I don't know, I can't say I was very impressed by the Super Adaptoid.
He's the super adaptoid, but he's also, I mean, he's just the Avengers Super Scroll.
That's the fair way to say it, is that the Super Adaptoid and the Mimic are just the Super Scroll, but much worse. The Super Scroll is a much cooler character.
Oh, yeah.
If we're ranking, I much prefer the Super Adaptoid to the Mimic. Even though I much prefer the X-Men to the Avengers, so it's a weird inversion. But speaking of generic villains, number 30, we get arguably the most generic villain in the lot. This is the Warlock in the Warlock Wakes. I guess he was an already extant Thor villain. I vaguely remember reading him fight Thor.
I don't remember much about him at all. And it was an interesting just transition here where he's like drawing in Jean and Professor Xavier into this like weird world.
A techno medieval world. The artist on this has a fill-in artist. It's Jack Sparling as opposed to Werner Roth. We talked about him in the first episode on the X-Men. Does the bulk of these issues. He's a German artist who was initially drawing under a pen name as Jay Gavin. But Jack Sparling fills in on issue 30, Warlock Wakes, and I'd never seen or heard of Sparling's art, but I was looking him up, and he also drew literary adaptations of Robin Hood and A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. So maybe the subject matter and the weird techno-medieval world of this was Roy trying to lean into Sparling's strengths. I gotta say, I'm not very impressed with Sparling's art from what I saw in this.
This is the first introduction we have of Xavier using his hover chair.
Although he actually steals a hover cycle from Warlock. You see him at the end. Although it doesn't reappear, does it? I was hoping
No.
it would, but it doesn't.
Maybe he appreciated it so much he just, hey, I could use something like this.
Another thing to stress, too, about these issues more broadly that number 30, the Warlock Wakes, raises is that Roy does create some important new characters in the Avengers, from what I understand. I haven't really read that stuff either. We might look at it in the near future, listeners, but he does create at least some important new characters in his much longer Avengers run. But in X-Men, he's mostly recycling a lot of lesser Kirby and Lee creations, right? Super Adaptoid, Warlock. It's interesting how much the impetus to create new characters for the X-Men has fallen off after that first volume.
Well, speaking of villains I knew nothing about, the next issue we have Cobalt Man.
I don't know anything about Cobalt Man either. I presume he's an Iron Man villain.
I've seen him before, and I thought he was some clone of Iron Man, but he's another scientist who has an idea to make armor, and he makes armor, but he can only use it for 2 hours, or the power source will implode and cause an atomic bomb.
That's a great condition to put on your superpowered suit. That's issue number 31. We must destroy Cobalt Man. I got to be honest, I had nothing for Cobalt Man. What I was paying attention to in this issue was we see the X-Men go to a Bohemian Village club called the Monkey's Paw.
Yeah.
That's monkeys spelled like Monkey the band, but singular. The Monkey's Paw. And the coloring and the backgrounds, man, it's pretty psychedelic. I dig that.
It's a psychedelic club. Lots of fun going on there.
The next 2 issues are a 2-parter with the Juggernaut. Issue 32, Beware Juggernaut, My Son, and issue number 33, The Crimson Cosmos. You might have taken a lot of satisfaction from this because we joked a lot when we were covering X-Men 92. Check it out on Patreon, listeners, if you haven't. It's only 1 Fin American dollar.
Oh, only $1.
Only $1. But we joked about Xavier having a fetish for trapping people in hover chairs. I believe we see him do it with both Juggernaut and Sabretooth in X-Men 92. And here we find out that this goes way back to 1966 or 1967 because we have him trapping a comatose Juggernaut into a chair. He's been doing this, and he just keeps him in the basement of the Xavier Mansion, and he's been there for months since they fought the Juggernaut. Matt, he's been in the basement.
This is some of my favorite art that he's kept him in a coma down here. And the way they went with a full page spread to show this is great.
Is it he's keeping him in a coma, or that he's in a coma and he's imprisoning him while he's in a coma?
I thought he was keeping him comatose, is what I was understood.
Oh, wow.
Thought that he had
Yeah,
zapped his
I'm
brain
not
or something.
sure. That's really dark if that's what he's doing. Crazy, man. Crazy.
Later on, he does trap him in the crystal. Pretty much the same idea.
This starts to be one of your favorite issues because you like the Juggernaut. I think you like the Juggernaut more than me, it's fair to say. But then it turns to ashes in your mouth when Doctor Strange and Doctor Strange's mentor, the Ancient One, show up in a flashback. And my question for you is, were you disturbed by how similar Professor X and the Ancient One, Doctor Strange's mentor, look?
It threw me for a loop because I thought this was Xavier in a past life or Xavier in the astral plane.
Funny, it's not at all obvious from this issue, but the Ancient One is alive and active in the early 1960s Doctor Strange comics. Eventually, he does die. So in one sense, the Ancient One couldn't be a past life of Professor X. But on the other hand, the Ancient One is so enlightened and so beyond reason and plot. If anybody was going to have multiple karmic incarnations of himself alive at one time, I could see the Ancient One doing it.
That does make sense. The art on the covers of these Juggernaut issues is insane, Bob. I don't get what they were doing differently to make it look so smooth.
I don't know if it's a change in the inker or a change in the printing process. I'm not sure.
If you're reading along with us, folks, you'll see that, man, that when you hit those Juggernaut issues, they did something different with the covers that pops.
It's a bit simpler than Kirby's lines, for sure.
Not necessarily issue 32, but 33 for sure.
This is a famous cover, too. Moving on, issue number 34 is
not a famous cover.
To not a famous cover.
Or a famous issue.
War in a World of Darkness. We get Dan Atkins as the fill-in artist on this. I only know him from doing a few issues of Doctor Strange around this time. And in my dim memories of him on Doctor Strange, he's pretty good. Here, it's not so great. I think it's maybe like the choice of inker was not working well with what Atkins was laying down in the pencils on 34. I don't know if you... Is this the one with the Mole Man, 34?
It's a little dark and shadowy. Oh my gosh. This seems like it'd be such a simple tale of them going underground and facing the Mole Man and this other character.
Urano.
Yeah.
I think it's a pre-existing Hulk villain, but I'm honestly not sure.
It's an easier way to tell these types of tales. This is just, it just goes all over the place. This issue for sure is where I noticed the jumping about the settings.
I think you've nailed that. That's partially what Rascally Roy is doing on the writing, is he's taking simple scenarios and then he's complicating them as much as possible. Issue 35 is fairly interesting. That's Along Came a Spider, and as the name would suggest, that's where we get a full-on Spider-Man crossover. Here it's occasioned by a misunderstanding of Banshee is spying on the Factor 3, sends a garbled transmission about the Factor 3's mechanical spider. The X-Men misunderstand this and start fighting Spider-Man.
Banshee's back to wearing his little thing in his head. But he does look more traditional here in this comic, I have to say.
He's getting close to it. Although the opening splash page of him is still, he's rocking that fairy look to a leprechaun look to a certain extent. Not an amazing issue, but one of the better issues of the run, along with the Banshee introduction. Although in a way, it's also part of what Matt thinks, and what I would have to agree is the worst ongoing story, which we're going to plunge into next, because we have this ongoing Factor 3 story that's been being hinted at for a few issues.
God.
And we can just treat issues 36 through 39 as being one unit of this Factor 3 storyline. So issue 36 is Meccano Lives. Issue 37 is We the Jury. Issue 38 is The Sinister Shadow of Doomsday. And issue 39 is fittingly titled A Fateful Finale.
I've read all the issues, Bob, but I don't have a clue even. I still don't understand what Factor 3 is. It's 3 dudes, I think, and they all wear masks.
It's confusing because at one point in these issues, I think it's in 37, there's a big reveal that we have Vanisher, Blob, Mastermind, and Unis the Untouchable are all returning, but they are not the Factor 3, which you may notice that because there's 4 of them.
That's what threw me out too. I was okay, we're gonna just reveal previous villains or Factor 3. Great, okay. That's the 60s. But then there's 4 of them, and no, that's not what they're going for.
And they're serving as the jury for the Factor 3. And then it's also further confusing because, in part, just by the need to have a final boss for each issue, right? You've got the Mutant Master, who's especially prominent in 37. And then you have in 37 or 38, you also have the Changeling. Spoilers, listeners, I know you're on the edge of your seat. Professor X dies in a couple of issues. And in the next volume, I believe it's going to be revealed that's not Professor X. That's the Changeling impersonating Professor X who died. And I'm going on about this because the Changeling is the original version of Morph from the animated series. So who could say this is not important for X-Men continuity, Matt? It introduces the template for Morph.
There you go, guys. You've got him right there. That's it.
We have the pre-established villains who are the jury for the Factor 3 because the Factor 3 are mutants, but they want to put the X-Men on trial for the crime against mutants. Then we have the Mutant Master and the Changeling, neither of which who are part of they work for the Factor 3, but they're not the Factor 3. Then we also have the added confusion of the Changeling's connections to Morph and that he's going to impersonate Professor X later in these issues. And then the fact that the Mutant Master looks like Eric the Red.
At the end, the Mutant Master disintegrates into a tentacled monster or something. This is poorly done. It's not fleshed out in a way that's interesting at all. I don't understand it. With a name like Factor 3, was he trying to go for MI6 or some weird, like, British, I don't know.
James Bond, The Prisoner, all that. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that, but you're totally right. Although maybe Get Smart and Mission Impossible would probably be the more salient influences on this.
You're giving James it way Bond too much credit with The Prisoner.
It would be funny. I actually don't want to do this, but it would be funny to do an in-depth comparison of this arc with the Doctor Doom holding the Fantastic Four as prisoners in Latveria, a la the TV show The Prisoner. That would be a funny comparison to make.
It would be, Bob. I do want to say, though, Bob, at the end of this trio of comics, issue 39, the X-Men get new outfits for the second time. The second time in this epic.
And these are better. This is also probably the thing that actually matters the most that comes out of the story. Any thoughts on the new X-Men costumes that they get?
To clarify for the listeners, guys, at the beginning of this epic, Jean Grey made them new outfits. And they were the blue and yellow design, but they were cut a little differently, and they had red belts. By issue 39, she decided she's been spending all her time not doing X-Men stuff, sewing, and she made them new outfits. And
She's clearly not doing well at college if she's sewing.
Right. She's spending so much time sewing and thinking about Cyclops. And Cyclops' outfit has pretty much stood the test of time. That's what he wears all the time now. But it also is
classic Cyclops.
It's also changed the least from the original design, losing the yellow. Now,
not totally losing it to keep it in the gloves and the Speedo, but yeah, definitely making it much more blue dominant for sure.
Beast is just a palette swap where he has red instead of yellow. Jean now has on a mini skirt thing.
Which this one doesn't endure, but it's really famous, and they do go back to it from time to time, including in like the Krakoa era, right?
It's got the yellow mask and it's a green skirt get-up thing.
Yellow gloves. I would say if you're ranking these, to me, Cyclops probably has to be number one because of its legacy. And I would say the Marvel Girl get-up is probably number 2, right?
For sure, yes, because I can tell you right now that the Beast look, I like the Beast look because of the red, but it doesn't last.
I don't like the Beast one. The Beast one to me is the second worst. It's definitely an improvement, but I still don't think it's a good costume.
Right. Now, Iceman, I don't even know really what changed.
Maybe they're moving a little bit more. They'd already done this, but he looks a little more Iceman now than he did before, but he was already looking fairly Iceman as opposed to the Snowman that he was in the first volume.
Yeah, it does say that he got new boots and gloves. Okay. He specifically says that. Now,
I would put him at the middle, number 3,
yeah,
Beast at number 4.
The worst outfit ever in the history of comic books almost is Angel's outfit that's introduced here.
Angel's outfit is a war crime. There's no other way to describe it.
Even the coloring is not yellow and red that way.
It's a yellow top and red leggings, but then red suspenders over the yellow top. It's a god awful costume.
It hurts the whole appeal of Angel because it makes it look like his wings are not permanent.
It makes it look like instead of suspenders that they're
There's,
that holds the wing on.
yeah, that just doesn't make you seem like a powerful person because your wings can be removed.
It's also unsettling that the yellow of his shirt exactly matches the yellow of his hair.
Yeah.
It's a horrible look. I've got to ask, Matt, is this maybe a little bit of unconscious revenge? We've noted in the prior volume how intense the love triangle is between Jean, Scott, and Warren, and particularly how fairly inappropriate Warren. Is this unconscious revenge on Jean's part to make Warren just look terrible?
Could be to make Scott feel better. I never thought
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that, Bob.
She's trying to make Scott look good, and she's trying to make Warren look awful.
Which is a good point to make, Bob, at this juncture, in that the triangle continues throughout this epic, like in the first, which I didn't realize was such a big thing. Are you still amazed at how this continues on throughout?
Oh, yeah. I knew of it, but I had no idea what a central personal feature of these comics it was. One other thing to say about the costumes, Matt. Does it, and maybe you disagree with this, but to me, it seems like these new look costumes are somewhat inspired by Banshee's costume. Does that a little bit surprise you? I don't think I'd realized that Banshee's costume predated these costumes, and I had a bit of visual influence on these costumes.
Maybe to some degree. They're not that complicated, though. If anything, his looks the most like Angel's.
The move to textured costumes over musculature that are different colors as opposed to the uniform color scheme the X-Men had before. I think that's what I mean when I say Banshee's has a similar textured look over the muscles, and it's a similar green-yellow color scheme as Cyclops is blue and yellow, or Jean's green and yellow.
It makes everything stand out a little bit on their actual bodies. My question to you is this, though, Bob. With the Fantastic Four, you had them start off, they didn't have uniforms. Then they had the uniforms, that they were all had the exact same thing. And Fantastic Four did incredibly well because you had a team book, team uniforms, there was solidarity. However, the Thing and Human Torch were visually distinctive. All right, then you look at the X-Men, and you had everybody wearing the same blue and yellow uniforms with absolutely no one other than Iceman being visually distinctive.
Well, an Angel because of the wings.
Because of the wings. But it was just distinctive in the sense that it's just white. There's nothing else really popping out. So then they decide to go and they put the red belt on everybody to make them look somewhat, to make them stand out a little bit. Now you've got these outfits that are introduced in the issue 39 that each character has almost their unique look. The belts are the same. They all have an X on them, yes. There's that uniformity there. However, they all do still have that distinct coloring. That's what I should say. Maybe that this costume change was a way to just refresh their look in hopes that they would draw more readers.
Maybe I'll be proved wrong, but I believe they basically keep these costumes for the rest of the run. Cyclops and Jean in particular are still rocking these outfits early in New X-Men. One other thing I should have said earlier, so for this Factor 3 story that's issues 36 to 39, I should just briefly shout out the two different artists we have here. So Ross Andrew is the penciler on 36 and 37. He's the most famous for working on late Silver Age and early Bronze Age Spider-Man. Then we have, starting with 38, Don Heck is going to do 5 issues of X-Men, so 38, 39, and 3 more. And he's the co-creator of Iron Man. I got to say, the inks for Heck on 39 are awful. Even though I like how Heck draws these new costumes for the most part, this is one of the worst looking issues, 39. Moving on to issue 40, which is also drawn by Heck, this is Mark of Frankenstein's Monster. And you might think, dear listener, from looking at the cover and that title, that this is about Frankenstein's monster, but it's actually about an android imitating Frankenstein's monster. Although it is interesting that within a few years, once the Comics Code loosens up on horror comics, Marvel will do a comic about Dracula that's amazing. It will do a comic about a werewolf that's pretty good. And it will also do a less successful comic, although still somewhat successful comic, about Frankenstein's monster. I haven't read the 70s Frankenstein monster. I don't know how it is, but interestingly, that those comics that are to come in the 70s will be written by Gary Friedrich, who also will take over writing X-Men for a few issues shortly.
And listeners, you know how he's an android Frankenstein?
How do you know that?
Because he can shoot lasers from his eyes.
What else would you want Frankenstein's monster to do, man? Doesn't he do that in the new Guillermo del Toro movie?
In this issue and in the previous issue, we start this new thing where we're doing an Origins of the Uncanny X-Men
Yeah.
backup. This first one is all about Cyclops. And I enjoyed these. I liked it. This is where you hit more of the human stuff, like the emotional stuff with the X-Men and develop their characters.
See, that's the difference. I think in my prejudice against the prequels,
Oh,
I just want better stories.
these were interesting, just learning about this random Diamond Man, Jack of Diamonds. He
Yeah,
becomes the
it's Jack and Diamonds or Jack of Diamonds?
it's Jack O Diamonds is what it
Jack
says.
of Diamonds. Okay, we're
Jack
both
O
wrong.
Diamonds, but that's just when he has. That's
Diamonds.
only Bob when he has his hands as diamonds.
He's billed as the first evil mutant.
He really is, but then he explodes at the end, so we're all good.
We've got issues 41 and 42. 41 is Now Strikes the Subhuman, where we try to come up with an underground equivalent for Namor. What's his name? Grotesque the Subhuman?
Grotesque.
Grotesque the
Stupid
Subhuman.
name. God, I
And
thought I was
then,
reading like a '90s comic at that point.
then it is a very 90s aesthetic for that title, isn't it? And then 42, we've got Death of Professor X, exclamation point. I want to ask, Matt, were you a little surprised that they didn't just kill Professor X at the climax of the Factor 3 story rather than having him survive and then doing it 3 issues later?
Factor 3 was just so intriguing, Bob. I don't know how they could have paid off any more with the death of Professor X. They held out for after the Frankenstein issue.
You needed Professor X alive for the android Frankenstein monster issue. You then go to issue 48, The Power of Magneto. For art, you have George Tuska, who co-created Luke Cage, filling in here. And I just thought it was fascinating that they kill Professor X in 42, allegedly. Then they immediately reset to doing an X-Men versus the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants story. That was, from a plotting perspective, baffling choice, because Magneto and the Brotherhood have been largely absent for this whole run. And I think that's in part because Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch have been occupied in Avengers, and this is in a period where they're not occupied in Avengers, but still fascinating plotting.
The main thing was that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were messing with the Avengers, and this also was leading to a tie-in with Avengers, which was part of the Epic Collection.
But I didn't read it because I'm just reading digital copies of X-Men, and I didn't care enough to go seek out the Avengers issue. Sorry, Matt.
Well, Bob, you missed out. Not really.
I look forward to hearing what I missed out, but I did really suffer before I missed out because I really suffered from the next issue, number 44, Red Raven. Oh my God, I hate Red Raven so much, Matt.
This was bad.
I vaguely knew Red Raven was some Golden Age Marvel hero. He's got a pretty standard bird people origin from the Golden Age. He was raised by bird people, so he flies. He was co-created by frequent Jack Kirby collaborator Joe Simon. But what I didn't realize was that he only appeared in one issue in the Golden Age, Matt, before his book got canceled, for good reason, I would say. And this is his big return. It's written by Gary Friedrich, who I already mentioned will write the Frankenstein's monster comic in the 70s. Gary Friedrich is also the co-creator of Ghost Rider and the co-creator of The Son of Satan. It's fair to say this Red Raven issue of X-Men is not Gary Friedrich's best work.
This is a terrible issue of comic books in general.
It's weird because Roy left us in 43 with the start of this X-Men versus Brotherhood story that isolates the X-Men. And so Gary Friedrich takes over here in 44, and this is an Angel solo story of him encountering Red Raven.
Okay, Angel, he has to go and tell the Avengers to help the X-Men. In order to do this, he has to cross the ocean. To get there, he gets really tired, and he falls asleep on a rock, and then the rock turns into an island, and inside the island is the Red Raven.
Most natural thing in the world.
Yeah, so normal.
So normal. Another thing about this issue that was pretty interesting is, and this is the only thing I really had to say about these Secret Origin backups that you started talking about in the prior issue, is we have the reveal in 44 in the backup that Iceman was the third X-Men, Xavier being the first and Cyclops being the second. And I just always thought it was a little surprising that Iceman, the youngest, was the third.
I did think this was strange. If not, it would have been Warren.
I think the order goes Xavier, Cyclops, Iceman, Angel, Beast, Jean, because we see Jean join the school in the first issue. A little bit of trivia that I think the backups will go into, but I'm not sure, is that for a brief time before he became an X-Men, Angel was running around as a vigilante in a costume before he joined the X-Men.
Was he called Red Raven?
I think he did have a Golden Age hero name. I don't know if it was Angel or something else. It wasn't Red Raven, thankfully.
Yes.
So, Matt, next issue is issue 45, When Mutants Clash. We're continuing this structure of we had the Brotherhood capture the X-Men, and then we're having these solo comics of the X-Men dealing with it. We had Angel encountering Red Raven last issue. This one, we have a culmination of the Cyclops Quicksilver rivalry that we talked a little bit about Epic Volume 1. Then we have the Avengers show up. And Matt, my most important question to you about the Avengers showing up: how freaky do you find it to have Black Panther's chin exposed in this version of his costume?
That's a weird looking for his costume, man. Keep him covered up. So much cooler looking, so much more mysterious and
Yeah, you
scary.
need the full face mask. It's important.
That cutout part just doesn't do the job.
Makes him look like Captain America or
Yeah.
Batman. Not a good look.
There is one illustration, Bob, on the second page of this issue where Cyclops is trying to escape, and he has this thing over his visor where he's unable to fire his optic blast. But when he does manage to squeeze out a little bit of optic blast, it like pushes against the visor thing, and you see the red coming out. And when you look at it, it looks like blood. I'm surprised that got by the standards people.
I didn't notice that, but I see what you're saying. I think that is pretty clever on behalf of our artist to get that. We should say on this issue, Don Heck is doing the layouts, who we talked about before, and Warner Roth is doing the finishes on this.
As we've gone further into the issues, the actual pacing has slowed down a little bit compared to where it was at the beginning of our excursion.
In some ways, Gary Friedrich is a less crowded writer than Roy Thomas, which is a nice thing. But if you were going to praise Roy and condemn Gary, you'd have to say that Roy seems to have a better sense of where he's going.
Right.
Gary. This continues into issue 53 of Avengers, Matt. Did you read that?
I did. No, I was not excited about it. I don't feel Magneto in Avengers is a great thing. There's one good scene in this issue where, in the Avengers issue, Bob, where Cyclops calls out not knowing who Black Panther is, which I thought was cool. Because Black Panther's a newer character at this point. But he's, instead of Hercules, he sends you, whom I don't know, from Adam, calling out Black Panther.
I didn't notice this before, but going back through this issue, my God, Scarlet Witch looks awful in this comic.
Anytime you give her that full pink, it just doesn't look right.
The pink is terrible.
It needs to be red if you're Scarlet.
Or a dark red. I gave you a list of our Roy Thomas villains. This isn't every villain who shows up, but it's the main villain in every Roy Thomas and then Roy Thomas successor comic we read so far. And I wanted to know if you could rank these in order of preference, because there's such a diverse and cool array of villains here, Matt. I included Lucifer and Count Nefaria here just because those were Roy Thomas comics from the first. All right, listeners. So I prodded Matt into ranking all of the Roy Thomas and Gary Friedrich villains we've encountered thus far in X-Men. So we went back to a couple from last epic, but we've got all of the Roy Thomas villains, most of whom, like we said, are pre-existing Marvel villains. And we have your ultimate list of Roy Thomas X-Men villains thus far, Matt. Shall you read through the list?
Sure, Bob. At the top of the list, we have Juggernaut, Magneto, Quicksilver, Count Nefaria, Puppet Master, Mole Man, Super Adaptoid, Cobalt Man, and here's where it really starts to take a drop. Locust, Kukulkan, who is actually El Tigre, or El Tiger, I guess they say.
El Tigre gets transformed into Kukulkan.
You've got the android of Frankenstein's creature, Grotesque the Subhuman, Lucifer, Ogre, Mutant Master, Warlock, Red Raven, and then Meccano is our least.
We left out a few villains because I just tried to pick one villain who was the star of one issue or 2 or 3 issues, depending on the story arc. A lot of these are, like we said, pre-existing Marvel villains. You've got that stretch that's Count Nefaria, Puppet Master, Mole Man, Super Adaptoid, Cobalt Man. Then you've got the new ones who are mostly a tier below that. You were saying Locust, the android of Frankenstein's creature, Lucifer, Ogre.
You'll never see them again, I don't think.
I would hope not. Although at the very bottom, Warlock and Red Raven are reappearing characters. Those were not original to Roy. And I think Meccano was a new character at the bottom, but I'm honestly not sure.
He was new.
So we have looked at some awful villains, Matt. Let's go into some positive stuff. What was your favorite art from this collection?
Well, my favorite art was in issue 32, Bob, when we had Juggernaut in chains. He'd been locked behind that door. They had alluded to this door that was in the basement of the X-Men mansion that Professor X refused to let anyone go behind or see what was behind the door. And it was Juggernaut chained up.
Matt really liked the vindication of our coverage in X-Men 92.
I also really liked the cover of issue 42. It was the Death of X-Men, Death of Professor X. But it's weird because it has all the X-Men and their reactions to his death, but then it has Professor X being launched out of his chair in silhouette.
We'll later find out that it's Changeling. So my favorite art from this collection was from the El Tigre Cuchulainn story arc. And Warner Roth on page 8 of issue 26 draws a giant feathered serpent statue with a solar stone crown. And I thought that was really cool, man. I thought it was awesome.
When it comes to favorite issue, mine goes to issue 32, which was our Return of the Juggernaut.
Matt is a total mark for the Juggernaut.
I really am in these early issues of X-Men. I'm a total mark for the Juggernaut.
I just love seeing the Juggernaut. I'm going to have to give it to the Banshee, issue 28. It's the Whale of the Banshee. I'm sorry. I got nostalgia for him. Even though the Ogre is a terrible villain, I got nostalgia for Banshee. Matt, what was your least favorite issue?
My least favorite issue, Bob, was issue 30, Warlock Wakes, primarily because it was so boring. It was one of those I had to trudge through, and when I had to trudge through something like that, I'm done.
The Warlock is brutal. The art on that one, like we said, not amazing. My least favorite was 36. That's Meccano. It's also when we were really getting in, trying to get into the mechanics of the Factor 3 stuff that who cares. So my least favorite villain, I'll go ahead and spoil it, is Meccano, and my least favorite issue is the Meccano issue. Matt, who was your favorite X-Men in these issues?
I'm surprised, though, that neither of us chose issue 44, Red Raven, but I guess we were just...
There's something... Red Raven is awful, but there's something fascinating about how bad he is, where Meccano is just boring.
Well, yeah, I actually remember the plot from the Red Raven, whereas the Meccano, I'm okay, it was just a dude in a suit.
Even that cover, I'm looking at that cover of 44, I don't know that I would call it a good cover, but it's a very fun and interesting cover.
All right, Bob, so when it comes to favorite X-Men in the issues, I'm going with Jean Grey, because if you want to see how to write women correctly, you want to make sure that you look at how he writes Jean Grey versus how he writes Invisible Girl.
That's an instructive contrast.
Jean Grey is a strong female character in this book. Like, I'm impressed by how well she's written it early on, especially considering how poorly she's written in the 90s.
Honestly, if they redid these comics for the modern day, it would make a lot of sense to have Jean be the leader.
For sure.
In a lot of ways, she's the most interesting and dynamic.
If they were going for that shift before Professor X died and that he bestowed his power upon her or whatever, they were pulling at straws for where they were going with this stuff, but they could have gone in that direction.
Jean's my favorite in these issues, too. Who's your least favorite X-Men in these issues?
Iceman, this is a weird reason. It's his look. He's got that angled Iceman look in a lot of these issues that I just don't like. It's almost like he's shaved. His eyes goes at these weird angles to make him look like diamonds. It bothers me. I don't like that look of Iceman. And also, he spends way too much time going to the soda shop, hanging out with his girlfriend. Him and Beast have this buddy thing that I was not aware of. It's what Human Torch and Thing want to be.
It's a lot less toxic than Human Torch. That doesn't make it entertaining to read about.
Iceman is not my favorite in this epic.
I initially still wanted to say Xavier, but Xavier is off screen a lot even before his fake death. So I can't really say Xavier. So I'm going to give it to Angel just because of that costume. Also because he continues to be obnoxious about Jean. But that costume, it's a war crime.
My favorite foe, Bob, goes to Juggernaut, like I've already said, and yours goes to...
Magneto. It's weird because on the one hand, we're spoiled for choice, Matt. We had so many villains to rank. On the other hand, there's so many of them are so bad. And it is remarkable how little Magneto is in these issues compared to how much he's in a good chunk of the first epic.
It also doesn't help either, Bob, that a lot of the main villains have purple capes and wear red just to throw you off to make you think it's Magneto. They did that on purpose. That was intentional.
Mutant Master, Lucifer, even Count Nefaria, all just bargain basement Magnetos to a great extent.
No.
All right, Matt, I already said my least favorite foe was Meccano, but you probably have the correct answer for this.
I'm giving it to Factor 3 as a whole. Because Factor 3, even at the end of the run, I'm still confused by really what their whole goal was, what they consist of, who's in charge. They wanted to put the X-Men on trial for crimes against mutants.
Although we say there's no influence of the prisoner, but that really is a very prisoner, very Franz Kafka, the trial type plot, isn't it?
Truly is, Bob. When it comes to favorite guest star, Bob, I'm just going to say having the issue Avengers number 53 as part of this epic and being able to see some of the Avengers that I'm not used to seeing, that was my favorite guest star.
Wow, I've really missed out, I guess. I'm going to give it to Spider-Man just because both Spider-Man appearances were somewhat amusing.
Yeah. My least favorite guest star, Bob, I'm giving it to Doctor Strange in issue 33.
Matt is just a hater of Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange kindly comes into this book to help him out with the Juggernaut, and Matt hates him.
Don't care for him.
That's unfortunate. I love Doctor Strange. I'm going to give it to Red Raven. Oh, God. Red Raven is both a villain and a guest star because he was the star of his own book in the Golden Age. Oof, Red Raven. Bad stuff, man. Bad
Very
stuff.
bad.
We'll see how bad it gets in Epic Volume 3, Matt, which we will cover next week. Maybe it'll get a bit better. I tend to remember that it does when Neil Adams comes on. So maybe that's something for you and the listeners to look forward to, is that early Neil Adams art.
Yeah, I look forward to Neil Adams art, Bob. I'm always down for Neil Adams.
And Rascally Roy will return, and you'll have a lot more to read.
Hooray!
All right,
Get my readers ready.
get your reading glasses polished. So, listeners, join us next week as we pick up the third X-Men epic to conclude our coverage of Silver Age X-Men before we go into X-Men Grand Design. I am Bob in Cascadia. That is Matt in the Southland. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for listening.